you need to have at least 55% open space. This shows 55% open space. And, you know, what lots of this size, you know, would look like. Considering that you need to meet the open space, but there's no minimum lot area. But we all know you need to have a mostly rectangular lot to achieve your side, front, and rear yards. So the next two slides are Sorrel Hill from the ground, number 1 and number 2. Okay, so we go to the next slide and say, okay, well, what's the difference between all of those slides and the plans that township engineer did, and really why we're here tonight. And down at the bottom of this slide, it pretty much says graduating above the 55% open space. The current draft of the ordinance says if an applicant were to propose the so-called density neutral, no more than 1 unit to the acre, and proposed duplex or twin homes, where 2 homes are joined with a common party wall, you would need to have 60% open space. Or if there would be townhomes where 3 dwelling units would be attached, you would have to have 65% open space. And all the while, you know, 1 unit to the acre must have public water and sewer. And several of you mentioned on October 25th that would be a stretch because of the distance that the Lewis property is from existing public water and sewer. But nonetheless, in the R2 district, the properties that were looked at north, south, east, and west in the township all had to be at least 20 acres in order to have any meaningful open space and the ability to have flexibility in positioning lots and buildings. So we'll go next to the Pannoni slide where they did a hypothetical plan if you had the townhomes, if you had 3 homes attached, and that would require 60% open space, and this plan actually shows 66% open space, but no more than 1 unit to the acre. And as you can see in that horseshoe-shaped alignment that they drew, kind of nests together and around the existing house and barn. Let's go next. So the next slide basically said if you took the lot lines off and a home was conveyed as a footprint deed, what it might look like. And this is like the previous, it just erased the lot lines. And what happened is it achieved 83% open space. So admittedly, by making a more compact arrangement of the homes and not having fee simple lots, that's why it went from 66 to 83% open space. And then finally, in the next slide, so questions would be, before we go to the last township engineer yield plan, what neighborhoods currently have the attached duplex or twin units? So the Applebrook neighborhood is shown where each of those rectangles are just 2 homes joined together. Other places are preserved at Applebrook, Yardley Village, Vassar Village. So let's go to the next slide. So this is preserved at Applebrook from Street, and the next, again, preserved at Applebrook from the street of the duplex or twin homes. Next. Okay, so the final option the township engineer drew was the semi-detached. And so this is pretty much showing the, let me get my numbers straight, 60% open space, and some of the lots are a little bit, say, broader than what we saw in some of the previous slides. This has actually 69% open space. But in order to achieve the higher amounts of open space, the 60 and the 65, there's really not too many options other than to nest potential lots or dwellings around the area where the house and the barn is located. Otherwise, it encroaches into the open space. Let's go next. Keep going forward. That was backward. Let's go forward. Oh, I'm sorry, Mark. Let's go back. I guess that's the duplex. The twins without the lot sizes. I apologize. And so that's actually showing 86% open space compared to 60 that would be required. And it's again as a result of the lot areas. And so finally, the on-the-ground slides that show examples of what we saw on the previous slides would be example where, let's go forward. So they're the twins, kind of a little out of sequence, but let's go to the last two on-the-ground slides. Go next, go to the next, there we go. So the examples of where in East Goshen Township are triplex or townhome or carriage home units, the Yardley Village neighborhood is what's shown in that slide. And one more slide. Yeah, and so that shows in plan view what those triplex units would look like. And let's go to the next slide. Again, example of Yardley Village, and next. Okay, before we go to that, I just want to say that in terms of why the township thought, and it was mentioned at the October 25th meeting, that there shouldn't be 4 or 5 or 6 townhomes connected, was twofold. One had to do with the traditional width of a home in East Goshen, where if you take a home that was built over time and it has various additions, we thought that if the supervisors were to consider an amendment, that the mass of the building would be no greater than what you would typically find for single-family detached, whether it would be a smaller one like the width of a duplex unit or something that grew over time, it would be no greater than the triplex or carriage house unit. So the rest of the time is for the Q&A. When you do that, Janet is going to step through. If you have questions that are related to the ordinance, Kristen probably best equipped, and then on these other plans I could weigh in on them. But Janet, back to you.
Thank you, Tom. We will now go into our public comment section. There are a lot of people here. We would like to be able to hear from all of you. So we would appreciate it if you could keep your comments fairly short and not repetitious. When you come up to the mic, please give your name and your address so that we can get it in the minutes. The meeting will end at 9:30, and I think we can get started. If you'd like to come up, just come up and line up behind the mic.
Need any information about me before I talk?
I need your name and address.
Okay. Karen Belize, 440 Beaumont Circle. I live in Bowtree, which is one of the developments that you had talked about. I'm for this change, and I sell real estate, so I know the demand for housing and twins and, smaller housing rather than single-family houses. Like, people in East Goshen are looking for things that first-floor master bedrooms, twins, things they don't have to maintain. They don't have to spend a lot of time and effort. And anything that's gonna give us more open space, I don't know, for the animals, for everything. I like the idea of the cluster things, so that, you know, we have all this open space. I get tired of saying house, 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 house. And the acre zoning thing, like, that's what it looks like, house, 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 versus, you know, open space, the open space we need. We need that look in the township.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Eric Tillis. I live at 1398 Morstein. Has somebody done a study to compare the number of units that could be put in now once you subtract out floodplains and crevices and cliffs? And how many units, most number of units that could be put in under proposals once you subtract out floodplains and crevices and cliffs? Because to me, that's what we're all kind of looking at here, is how is it going to affect the community? How many people are we talking about adding to the community? How's it going to affect our quality of life?
Certainly. Tom, could you address that?
It would probably be a number in the low 30s, but it would be subject to, in the work that Pannoni did, they just basically used a computer program and they plugged in some of the variables. It doesn't include a grading plan, so, you know, considering that any of those hypotheticals that were shown in any of those slides, you have to have the proper drainage and try to minimize earthwork disturbance and retaining walls and so forth. And so someone would have to actually carefully achieve 60 or 65% open space, which you usually like to start with. What parts of Mother Nature should most likely be preserved on the site, whichever site it is, and then what are ingress-egress opportunities, and what is the most compact way to place the buildings, just like that computer model indicated, but then you have to grade it. And so once you grade it, you actually end up losing some lots, depending on the topography of the site in question.
So, am I correct in saying that the samples that you gave had a maximum of, I think, 36 in and therefore, if there were problems with grading or stormwater or whatever, it would probably be less than that?
Well, I think it would have to be no more than 36, and it could, depending on the reviews of the stormwater management and the grading and the property configuration, it might be less than 36, but I don't think it would be more than 36. But it could be 35, it could be 33. It would depend on the so-called site engineering.
But if you look at option 3, which is an existing option in the township, not considering that of grading and so on, you have 36 units. And then option 4A, which is the duplex option, you have 36 units. And the difference is that the existing plan, while it allows 36 units, that's 55% open space, and the duplex option would have 83% open space. So it's just, to Tom's point, you might lose a couple of those 36 units on the existing option 3, which is allowed in the current zoning. You might lose a couple of those homes.
Good evening, Bob Madonna, 1422 Garrett Lane in Goshen Downs. Could you explain to me the plan for access to the development through Goshen Downs?
I'm going to need Rick Smith to help on that one.
When the Pannoni did the engineering, we did not assume any access to Goshen Downs.
So there's no path coming through to come through there.
We do not assume any access under these plans.
Okay, let me clarify that. What could be potentially happen going through access through Goshen Downs?
Today, that one cul-de-sac abuts the property line.
Right. So would we go through people's backyards to get access?
Again, today, that right-of-way for the cul-de-sac abuts the property line. That property owner has the same right to access that road as you do or anybody else.
So
Whether or not he constructs that road and connects to it is all subject to in the future.
So my concern, Elijah, is that the amount of cars traveling through there, we have a nice neighborhood that's kind of quiet to a certain degree, because you got young kids playing there, you got cars coming through there, if they're going to use that as an access road. I think I would speak for the whole development, we have some severe concerns that that would happen. And I would hope the township supervisor would stop that from happening.
My name's Allison Oshaw. I'm at 1334 Jackson Lane. And I prepared a statement for tonight, just so I didn't forget anything that I wanted to say. I oppose amending the R2 zoning regulation. I feel strongly that the amendment is being proposed because the land is not attractive enough to a builder or developer under the current zoning regulation. Much of my initial opposition to the amendment was related to open space conservation. I assumed that single-family homes would result in more open space preservation simply because so much of this tract of land is not suitable for building. If 20 to 25 single-family homes were able to be built on the land, a developer would have purchased it by now. The property has been up for sale in prior years and remains unsold. Although 4 out of the 6 conceptual drawings prepared with site ops show single-family housing within the constraints of the current R2 zoning, the plans don't seem feasible. The parcel of land in question is wooded, steeply sloped, and largely wet. It is hard to comprehend that the number of homes shown by site ops is in fact plausible. Why does this area need to be rezoned? Why not build large homes on large lots and keep with the current landscape of the area? The township already has a healthy mix of single-family detached homes, townhomes, and multifamily housing. There are several undeveloped 8 to 15 acre lots adjacent to Lewis property. If this amendment is passed, it is only a matter of time before those owners combine and townhomes are built there as well. Building density is not affected, but population density will be. If this amendment is passed, the demands on the infrastructure needed to support such development will increase. The rolling countryside landscape of this section of East Goshen Township will be forever changed. This amendment isn't being proposed because the Lewis family or East Goshen Township thought it would be great to preserve as much open space in this large parcel as possible. It is being proposed because townhomes are a win for the developers and a win for the township's tax coffers. Not only will all of East Goshen Township be affected by an amendment to this zoning regulation, but my neighborhood of Goshen Downs is subject to specific ramifications. As discussed at the last meeting, you'll recall that the residents of Goshen Downs were greatly disturbed at the idea of potentially putting a road through our 40-year-old neighborhood so that an adjoining piece of land could sell for more money. While it looks like the proposed plans do not currently include a road through our neighborhood, a new plan created by Trilogy Investments, representing the Lewis family, proposes townhomes on the northern end of the property and walking trails on the southern end with a pathway down to Jackson Lane. Several of the neighbors I've spoken with, along with myself, are strongly opposed to a trailhead on our quiet and peaceful cul-de-sac. We do not want the extra foot and car traffic or the noise and safety risks that come with it. Goshen Downs is a closed development with no cut-through streets. Where will people park that want to go on this walking path? The answer is on Jackson Lane. Families with young children live in this development and on this street. Traffic will be increased not only on Jackson Lane, but in Goshen Downs. The majority of residents that spoke at the October 25th Board of Supervisors meeting were opposed to an amendment. However, the township chose to continue pursuing design options for the parcel, should an amendment be passed. I'm submitting a petition to the Board of Supervisors signed by 439 residents, primarily in East Goshen and East Whiteland townships, that oppose the amendment. I implore you to please truly consider the wishes of the constituents you represent.
Hi, I'm Kathy Weishart, and what else do you need? Melbourne. I live in Melbourne. my address is 12 Anthony Drive, all right? Okay, East Highland, that's right. Last name is spelled Weishar, Kathy. So I know this was mentioned at the last meeting, but since our property adjoins the Lewis property, I'm very concerned about water runoff. That's a wet place. Turtle Pond's there, Turtle Creek's there, Ridley Creek is there. Okay? I'm very concerned that any kind of development there will cause water runoff to come into our property, toward our property. So I'm not sure how that is being addressed at all, but I certainly hope it's a big part of any kind of consideration. The other thing is public sewers. I mean, I know that's an issue. You know, we need to know a lot more before anything goes forward here as to what would happen with any kind of hooking into public sewers there. Okay, so those, you know, a big concern of us who live close by.
So I can just make a real simple comment on the stormwater management. This stage of the game is identifying the zoning for the property and what would be allowed and how it could be subdivided. If the zoning would ever get changed and they would present a plan, it would have to get zoning approval from the Board of Supervisors through a process called a conditional use. If that was, you know, approved, the next step in the development process is called subdivision and land development, and that's when the engineering details get worked out, and they have to comply with another ordinance of the township called the subdivision and land development ordinance, as well as the stormwater management ordinance. So East Goshen Township adopted a countywide stormwater management ordinance, sometimes referred to as the Act 167 ordinance. So every municipality in Chester County has a similar ordinance, and it requires that any development after development they have to control the quantity and the quality of the water that leaves the site. And the ordinances are very stringent, and it actually requires them to reduce the amount of water that leaves the site post-development. So that will be something that the township engineer reviews, very detailed stormwater management calculations, stormwater management plans. Post-construction stormwater management plan gets recorded. So I can assure you that your concerns about stormwater runoff would be handled and addressed at a later stage if this process would ever go forward to that. With respect to sewer connection, that would also be something that gets addressed during a land development process. And under today's ordinance, one of the options for the cluster does require public sewer, public water. So if under today's code, if they wanted to do cluster development, which is an option, they would have to provide public water, public sewer. For the conventional one lot subdivision under the R2, they do not require public water, public sewer. So just letting you know that there are provisions today, even without an amendment, that would require public water or public sewer connection. So that's something that would have to be analyzed and determined whether or not there is capacity at the East Goshen facility, how you do the connection. None of those details have been ironed out, and they probably wouldn't be at this stage of the game in terms of just determining whether an amendment is appropriate. It's really something that's a detail that's done further on as land development plans get prepared.
Kathy, sorry, I just have a question for you. Understandable about your concern on the runoff. Tell us a little bit more about public sewer. You just mentioned public sewer, but could you tell us what your concern is about the public sewer?
My concern is that during construction, that the property would be graded in a way that the water would come toward our properties, rather than, you know, what seems to be the natural flow down Ridley Creek and in that direction.
Thank you.
Yes, you know, just, again, a lot of these areas are very wet to begin with. You know, we don't have a problem at all with our house or our basement or anything like that, but it could change if there's, you know, a redirection of water, and it goes where it wants to go. So I just, you know, want to make sure that that issue is not lost in, you know, in all of our discussions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Joanne Tillis. I'm 1398 Morstein Road. And first of all, thank you to the woman from Goshen Downs. That was awesome. A couple of questions. First, I used to live in an HOA and I do now as well, and I know open space is, in theory, you have shown it to be a wonderful buffer along the outside, but that's not you can't dictate where the open space is, just the percentage of open space that has to be met.
No,
correct?
well, when it moves forward, for any plan that goes forth, existing zoning or this proposed zoning, the first thing you have to do is the developer hands in a plan. It goes to the planning commission, it goes to our engineer, it goes to the county planning commission, the way Kristen explained. So those issues, they would have to say, on that plan, it would have to dictate where the open space is. So yes,
And you can say, no, you may not put it there.
yes.
There's also open space design regulations within the
Okay.
proposed amendment, and it encourages preservation of certain areas over others. The land development process, the preliminary, the way this ordinance is drafted, to utilize the type of open space development, it requires a conditional use. I mentioned that earlier, but let me explain a little bit of what that is. So all uses within a zoning ordinance are either by right uses, where Mark Gordon, as the zoning officer, has the authority to issue a zoning permit for by right use. Single family dwelling, by right use, on a single lot. If it's the way this ordinance is drafted with a cluster development, it requires what's called a conditional use approval, which requires a public hearing process, and the only entity that has legal authority to grant conditional use is the Board of Supervisors. And then there's also a third type, which is a special exception, which the zoning hearing board serves as the adjudicator to determine whether that's. So this proposal would require conditional use. The conditional use applications are reviewed by the planning commission, they're reviewed by the conservancy board, and they're reviewed, in this case, because there's a historical structure, they'd be reviewed by historical commission. So all those bodies, which are recommending bodies to the board, would give input and feedback to guide where the most appropriate place for the open space would be.
So if they wanted it to curve around the road and use the barn building as a clubhouse and put in a pool, that would not be acceptable?
I don't think the proposal is to use the existing historic structure in any way other than a single family dwelling.
But my point is, HOAs oftentimes bring the open space into the community, within the community, for the community members to use, not the outside neighbors, but to have trails and pools and things, amenities for the neighbors. But all that being said, my biggest question is, these are, as I've been told, these are hypotheticals. These are not, no developer has been out there and said, I can put 24 lots out there. Nobody has actually based the number of dwellings on what the property might yield. I mean, you're doing it as if it's a big open field. It's such an important decision. How can we make this without knowing specifically what will happen? Do you know that you can put 24 homes?
That
single
is,
family?
I've been involved in writing zoning ordinances for the township since 1980, and you never know. I mean, you try to use your best judgment to develop zoning that is going to be good for the township, that's going to be good for the residents, that's going to be good for all of us.
And with all due respect, this plan is really being considered with the Lewis property. For now, I mean, what you're showing us, you would know, if someone surveyed this and knew how many single-family homes, you would not be guessing. You would know.
The problem is, if we could change the zoning, it is not just for this property. Because people were interested in this property, you folks were interested, this was the one that was chosen to use for examples. But if this ordinance were to change, there are several other properties that would be affected. So, and no, we can't predict what a builder is going to do. Although if you go to our website, we did get a possible plan for this property that had 34 units, no, excuse me, 36 units. But it's not, nothing has been proposed, nothing has been submitted to the township, nothing has started in the process, because, of course, the zoning hasn't been changed, if it's going to be changed.
Another point is that the zoning ordinance serves as establishing the maximum permitted. So the board has to make a legislative determination if one dwelling unit per acre is an appropriate maximum. Or, should it be lower than that? Should it be higher than that, a certain percentage of open space? So they're really defining the broad parameters, what's typically called the area and bulk requirements. You're not going to have, I don't think the taxpayers would want the board of supervisors to go and do the deep analysis and spend the engineering money and do the wetland surveys and the floodplain analysis and all that. I mean, that's really what somebody who's going to ultimately build spends the money and time on. They have to establish the broad brush in the ordinance, what would be allowable. Anybody that comes in and wants to purchase the property, again, not just this Lewis property, any other property in the township that meets the criteria, somebody wants to come in and utilize the ordinance, they have the right to go through the analysis and design a plan. So the money that's spent, and it's actually reimbursed by the applicant, is the township consultants then review those plans that are submitted against the township ordinance to make sure that they comply. But again, that's not on the taxpayer's dime, that's on the applicant's dime, who ultimately will build the development.
Hi, my name's Tom Ward. I live at 1468 North Steep Road. I also own 1000 Hershey Mill Road, which runs down to my property. I have a question on it. There was 8 acres for sale next to me on 14th when I first walked in. It's about 12 years ago. And I was interested in buying it to preserve it, keep it in the township, keep my parcel as one big, one of the last pieces of property. And I did a ton of research, worked with the Lewises, had an agreement of sale. Ultimately, it was taken by a guy next door that first I refused. But through all my research, the Army Corps of Engineers did studies along that area, the wetlands. The DEP was involved. I wasn't going to buy it unless it was going to be preserved. And all this runs right down to the middle of that valley. And there were some determinations in there with the wetlands, the steep slopes, completely undeveloped. And it's the same ridge that runs right to Hershey Mill Road. That's why I bought the piece on Hershey Mill Road, the 6 acres next to the Lewis's, because I know it would probably be undeveloped. And I had several conversations with Betty Lewis over the years while I was rehabbing my property on Moore Street. She'd come up on a golf cart. You're doing a beautiful job, wonderful job. We're going to keep this the way it is forever. And we're restoring a 225-year-old farmhouse. We got ponds, we got street, we got beautiful walking trails. And I guess I'm just kind of shocked that this has gotten to this point where it's actually in consideration. Because if anybody up there has walked this property, it's completely undeveloped. You guys are talking about building a fishing pond down at the dam, putting parking and trails and all. If you develop that, put that parking down below, and you develop this piece, first big rainstorm, that whole park's going to be over in Hershey Mill. It can't handle the water as it is. My property is affected. I've done so much work grading to keep the water coming from the shipper property above me. The water up in Starter Chase comes right down. Starter Chase can't handle it. All their inlets clog up. Then it runs into the field into the shipper property. Then it comes into my property. You should see it. It's a raging river. By the time it hits Hershey Mill, right, another property, you could wipe water rails down through there. I just can't even believe that it's even under consideration to do something like this. Hershey Mill Road is an old country road. I drive it every day. I take care of Immaculata University. They're one of my #1 clients. I sit in that parking lot and sell it. You should see the cut-through traffic coming up the Green Hill Road, the main road. To try to put something like that up there, there will be tragic accidents on that road. Not handled well. The property. I'm in the business of landscaping and excavation. There is no way you can control that water. chain to develop that. I work in Palmyra Township, I work in Radnor Township. I want to know why East Goshen doesn't have a fund set aside. Why aren't we buying that property and turn it into a nature center, a place to have weddings, functions? Why don't we have a fund every year that you send out to us, where we could send in $1,000 if we have to buy properties like this? Let's save this open space. Let's not develop it.
The township does have a certain amount of open space that I believe I spoke to Rick, it was about 500 acres.
Right now, about 1,200 acres, almost 1,300 acres of the township is reserved. The township owns 509 acres, and then the other 700 some acres are reserved with Hershey's Mill, Rossmore, other developments.
I just can't believe that something that pristine, it has no other value. Even the park you talk about coming in the end, it's a beautiful wetland. You see the mountains, you see the deer going through there, you know, the foxes, the mouse. To try to control that and turn it into a park, have 5 parking places that back out on the Hershey Mill facility, it's just that road is not deserve that. The property's just not fit for it. It would be a total shame to turn that into something.
We don't own that property, and unless there are other,
If it was buildable, a builder would have bought that already. I got $2 million into my place. I have over $2 million into my place, and, if I had an extra couple million around, I'd make the move on that and conserve it all.
I don't blame you, and certainly it's not the township's goal to develop that piece of ground, but the owner does have a right to develop the ground if they choose. It's not our choice, and certainly we don't know what would, with all the regulations that we have, I don't know what would eventually be placed there. But we really don't, anytime you purchase ground, there's a certain amount of upkeep. It's not like you bought the land and then the township can just ignore it. So there is a cost to taxpayers beyond the cost of the ground. So we have to consider very carefully what we do, because we do not want to increase the taxes to our residents. We have over 18,000 residents in the township, and we have a responsibility to every one of them.
I understand, but this is one resident that would make an extra contribution to keep that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Badema, and I live in Marydale Farms at 450 Barker Drive. And I got one of the 1,000 feet letters, and I'd like to understand what this new regulation will do to neighborhoods like Marydale Farms and Beautree Farms that already have some open space.
Nothing. The open space in Marydale Pinnos is owned by the township, but the open space in all the developments that were developed, Beautree, Rossmore, where they own the open space, is essentially deed restricted against further development. So your open space is forever the open space, just like the open space in Rossmore. Even though somebody HOA, you can no longer,
So why did we get a 1,000-foot letter?
You were probably within 1,000 feet of the Price property, which is off of Stratton Ellis Lane, the farm next to Price Fields.
Yep.
So if you're within, and again, we sent a 1,000-foot letter out to, there's almost 300 letters out, so that's probably what you got.
So this overlay doesn't impact existing open space?
It would impact, it could impact the Price property if one day decided to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, I'm George Palumbo. We live at 338 Ellis Lane in West Goshen, so we're directly across from the Price Farm. And I have a general concern, and I know the previous person talked about the 1,000-foot letter. And I never got a 1,000-foot letter. I talked with a couple of neighbors who also live on Ellis. They never got a 1,000-foot letter.
We sent them, our board's policy is that whenever an application for development comes in, we send a letter to every property owner with 1,000 feet of East Goshen residents. We also send a copy of whatever we sent to the residents to the neighboring township in Boston. So we sent the information to West Goshen, West Whiteland, East Whiteland, Willistown, maybe Westtown? I don't think Westtown, they weren't there. We sent a copy of everything that we had to them.
To the township?
Yes.
So, but the way I understood it, you were going to send a 1,000-foot letter to anyone who has
We only send to people within our municipality.
Well, do you think it might be a good idea to tell
We send it to your municipality. I don't know what other municipalities do. But if we get wind of a development in Westtown or West Goshen or something, we then notify our residents. But our ordinance only applies to us notifying East Goshen residents.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Reading through the information, that wasn't clear.
Okay.
In fact, when I first became aware of it, I should just say that I saw a sign that was on the Price Farm.
We post the property as well.
The printing was so small, I had to go back and get my reader's attention to see it.
Yeah.
And then less than 24 hours later, the sign was gone. So I think there might be a problem with the process. Now, I know apparently West Goshen is responsible for telling us. We weren't aware of that. It might be easier if you would take the responsibility of telling the people who are directly affected by this. Can't send it to them.
We don't have the power to represent other township residents. We can talk to you in a forum and answer your questions, anything like that. But as far as notification, that could be a breach to West Goshen Township.
Okay, thank you.
Marie Caddy, 630 Meadow Drive, and I live at the Price property. My concern, I am against the cluster homes, not just because of this particular property, but because of what it will do to the impact of all of the remaining properties that can be developed in East Goshen. It just stands to reason if you allow it in one, the remaining can. And my concern is the impact of not space density, but population density. I want to go back to address a question that I had in October and the answer that I was given. And these drawings contradict the information I was given. So I asked if the property is only allowed to be deeded 21 single-family homes or SIN 21D properties on there. If we then divide that and put a triplicate on that, does that then increase it to 61? And I was told no, that it had to still be 21.
That's true.
But when I look at these developmental things and I started counting as you were showing me the slides, there is a vast number of difference in the number of houses, number of actual physical addresses between the first slide and this cluster development. So what that says to me is there's some type of a discrepancy that is not being made clear. And it says to me that there are more people then, we're maybe not talking space density, but we are still talking population density. It's not just going to be 21 houses or 21 individual families that can be in there. It's definitely increasing as you come up into these cluster things. So how many people can really be put in there?
All right.
I did the calculations as we were looking at the slides, and the 1 acre lots, that showed 17 units.
That's what I counted as
On
well.
the 6/10 of an acre was 23 units. On the 20,000 square foot half acre were 26 units. In the no minimum, Sorrel Hill example, there were 36 units, and those are single-family detached. And then on the duplex and triplex, there are 36 units, so there's no more than 36 because that's the density calculation. So it doesn't go to 60 because all of a sudden you have three. It's restricted to 36. If you have 36 acres, 36 units, whether they're duplex, detached, triplex, doesn't matter.
Well, you just said the same thing that I counted, that each time you went to an increased thing, we were increasing the amount of people that we were putting in there. So when you kept it at the 1 acre, as we are now, there was still less population being put in there than there is if we go to this situation. And that is my concern, is that if we then allow this for this, we have the Price property. We have the properties up there, I know they're at the eastern end of our, but I can't think of the name of the property, but there's two properties. We have multiple properties that this could affect, which means it's going to increase the population within East Goshen. We already are in the process of renovating East Goshen Elementary. We already have problems now where we've had to decrease the speed limit on Paoli Pike because of the amount of traffic that is now on there. The more people and the more addresses, I'm not going to call them buildings, because if you put three people, a triplex in a building, that's 3 addresses. That's 3 more families. That's 3 more sets of cars. That's potentially 3 more families with little children that are going to impact our schools. So what I'm saying is I am against this because of population density.
Understand. I understand you perfectly. I have my granddaughters at East Goshen Elementary, and I understand the crowd. If you look, the first several cluster developments that Tom showed are already in our ordinance. They're Marydale and Bow Tree and various developments that have been there for years. And because of the ability to give open space that may be unbuildable, yes, you can get some more houses, but you're still limited to 1 per acre. No matter how it goes, if they have 36 acres, there is no way of getting more than 36 units under any of these plans.
But we just talked about how
No,
it makes a difference
you're
in the housing.
misunderstanding. Under the density calculation, regardless of whether it's a detached, duplex, triplex, apartment building, it doesn't matter. And there wouldn't be any apartment buildings. You can only put 1 address, to use your term, per acre, regardless of the kind of house. So when you put 3 houses instead of 1 detached, that does not increase the number. For example, in the no minimum available now to a developer, they can put 36 units on that property. That's existing now in the current R2 ordinance. So we're still limiting, if we put triplex on there, they can only put 36 addresses, again, to use your term. That's it. You're not adding addresses.
Okay, so I'll follow you on that. So then explain to me how on those first slides, we looked at 18 and now we're up to over 30 in this one. So explain how that's working.
Tom is good
Yeah.
for that.
So, Marie, you're right. And so is David. Because,
Yeah, I mean, I'm following what
Yeah,
David's saying, but
so-
I'm also looking at your pictures, and your pictures
Sure.
are showing
So-
me what we're saying.
so when faced with the choices and the menu of options that are available, if someone wanted to achieve the highest number of homes, then you would look at the Sorrel Hill model, where you would have 55% open space in their lot size, because these yield plans showed 36 lots. And that's the same number that David said showed up with the twins and the triplex. The reason you're correct is if someone chose a different option, if they did choose the Sorrel Hill, they chose the 25,000 square foot model with 50% open space and 40, and then they picked the 20,000 square foot model as you go down the ladder, you get to the lower numbers that David and you mentioned. So if it were 40 years ago, there was nothing on the books for nesting the lots together, then given the site conditions, you probably could put 17 to 24 homes, depending on how you positioned it and graded it. But the Sorrel Hill option with the 55% open space in the lot size would give someone the opportunity to put single-family homes. Wouldn't need any zoning change to do that. The only reason a zoning change would be needed is for the different housing type.
So really what this whole thing is boiling down to is that unless you cluster these homes together and you put in the 3 clusters, a builder's not going to buy it because he realizes he can't max out that property. So really this all comes down to a financial windfall for either the family that's trying to sell it, or a builder who's doing it, or a realtor who has to sell it. So this whole thing that we're going through right now is really just all about somebody trying to make money.
I don't deny those 2 options, but there is a third, and one is preserving open space and keeping the land most of the land open instead of having houses spread out through areas that we would like to conserve.
You can put it that way, but I will still say, just because of my being close to the Price property, then I will oppose putting in clusters. I would like to see this be able to go to a vote to the community, but I don't know that we will get that opportunity, will we?
That is not an option. The referendums on this.
Pennsylvania
So they don't allow you to do that.
is way behind, well, not behind. It's different than most other states, is it's very limited on what you can put on a referendum. For what it's worth, one of the few things we can put on referendum is the liquor question. And obviously that was on last year's ballot. But that's one of the few things that actually, under the law, they can go out and put on a referendum.
So really the only way then that you would know how residents feel is if they were to continue to write you letters and let you know.
And come here and speak. That's what we're here for. We are here to listen tonight.
Gotcha. So really then, as one resident did and got petitions, if more people got petitions, would that make a difference to you or not really?
Not really. I would rather have you come here and talk to us and tell us how you feel. Because this whole evening is for listening. We are not going to make a decision tonight, but we are going to take into account everything that we have heard and try to come up with a decision that's, again, best for the 18,000 plus people in the township.
So for people who have not showed up tonight, if they were to write letters or things like that, do you address those or not? I'm just thinking about, because I'm feeling like possibly the weather has kept people, and I know how many people were here in October. This is nothing compared to what were there in October, so I'm concerned, curious if there's other ways.
We listened to you in October too, and even though I was not at that meeting, I was sick, I did watch the YouTube from start to finish. So I did hear everybody's comments. So if you were here in October, we heard you. We're listening to you now. And that is how we communicate with the members of the township. We do want to know, but I wouldn't go about doing petitions and so forth. We are listening to you. We really are.
Well, I'm just saying with people who were not able to make it, if they did have concerns.
Well,
would there be a way for them to get in touch with you?
Of course, if they want to email us or you can always communicate with the board. But if it's just a repetition of things that have already been said, we've heard it. If it's something new, if it's something that hasn't been mentioned in one of these meetings, then definitely send an email.
All right, well, thank you.
Lady did about everything she said right now. My name is Bob Susky. I'm at 1537 Sleepy Hollow Lane. Hershey Mills Estates. I was the past president a year ago of Hershey Mills Estates. And we live in a beautiful township. And the people that own the land now are probably lovely people, the heirs. The developer probably has a wonderful family. And the real estate person here who wants to make the sale is just, a lovely real estate. I have a lot of friends in that business. The bottom line is, I spent 7 years on a zoning board in Gainesville, Florida. And you sit up here, and it's a very tough decision to make. I used to walk away from there saying, well, half of the people hate me, and half of the people like me. So I must have done something right during that time. I think what I want to say is, I would like to minimize any effect that it's going to have on our roads. I'd like to minimize the effect it's going to have on the environment, the wildlife. And from Hershey Mills Estates, I'm not speaking for anybody other than myself. The traffic coming down there, we are a form of cutoff for people. And why, I'm not sure. Because it seems they'd be better off just going out to the other roads at the end. But it's becoming a cutoff, and there's a lot of people running through there, and this is right next to us. We don't have, aside from Hershey Mills villages, we don't have a lot of cluster homes in that area, and I'm not really looking forward to that. I don't care about the heirs maximizing their profit or the developer maximizing his profit. I just like to see that you folks have 18,000 people you represent. There's a lot of fingers going out different ways. I understand that. But this, you have to look at the initial impact. The people who live far away aren't going to be impacted by this. Look at the people that are going to be impacted, the roads, the environment, everything involved, the schools, the buses coming up and down, the traffic, the lights. Please look at that and be sympathetic to everybody. They have a right to build on this property something, but they don't have a right to put 36 or 40. They have a right to put what's down there now at 23, 28, 18. There were so many pictures. I got here late. I went to the wrong place. I went to Fugit. I'm all over the place. I finally saw a sign. So, I want to thank you folks for sitting and listening. Amen.
Hi. My name's Dan Mansueto, and I live at 403 Beaumont Circle. And I guess I have a different perspective on this. I'm a resident of over 30 years, East Goshen, and when we saw Applebrook being developed, we were concerned when that property was sold, what was going to happen. And to be quite honest with you, I'm in favor of cluster homes because I drive by that area all the time, and it's just beautiful. The walking area, it's kind of nice to see people out and about, get the chance to talk to them and interact with them. And I also think that if this increases the value, do you guys have an idea what the cost of these homes will be?
Not cheap.
And that's what I'm hoping for. It is a small township, and I think it's managed quite well. And I think as a retired member of the community, I'm hoping for well-built, expensive cluster homes. It's a different perspective, but it's out there. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Courtney Zentz. I live on Jackson Lane at 1333, so I'm one away from this. We've been residents there for about 2.5 years, my husband, myself, and we have 2 small children there, 2 and 4, who play with the Oships, who have 3 kids, the Grays, who have 2 kids, and the Kinches, who have 1 kid, all on Jackson Lane. And I didn't have a chance to come to the last meeting. My husband did. I was on kid duty, so I came tonight to share my concerns. The first would be the renderings. Obviously, they're wonderful pictures, but they have no actual significance in what's gonna actually happen. And I just want some clarity, because this is new for me. Once it's rezoned, basically the Lewises have fair game to essentially have a developer come in, which it sounds like they've started the process of with Trilogy, to assess what's feasible, because it is wet. I take my kids up there to the trails, and we pick pine cones, and it's wet and it's steep, and Trilogy put together these renderings, right? So once the rezoning happens, if it moves forward, it's really out of anyone's hands, with the exception of the Lewises, because they own the property, to determine what, I guess, is going to make them, I mean, the most money, right? That's why they're essentially asking for the rezoning.
Once their developer puts together a plan, that just starts the process. This way that Kristen explained it before, it goes to the planning commission, it goes to our township engineer, stormwater calculations, and it may take, with a conditional use, it could take a year of review in the township before anything gets settled. And during that period, things change. You know, if something doesn't work, then the developer has to go back and make revisions. And I don't know how many units would finally come to pass. All I can tell you is it will be 36 or less.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the developer is going to come with their best game of, this is feasible, we've surveyed the land, it is wet, we're not building there, there's a bunch of steep slopes that are going to cause challenges, here's the best we can do. And as a result, I guess my concerns are, again, that there is a right-of-way which is owned by the borough or the township, and there is several renderings from Trilogy around a walking trail, which sounds nice conceptually, but I don't want a bunch of random people parking on my street to access said trail. There's plenty of parks, but who determines whether or not the Lewis family gets it rezoned, and then someone gets to use, as Rick mentioned, the egress there, or an emergency road, or somebody building? Like, what is the decision-making process?
This is all part of the process, and all this happens at public meetings. So if a preliminary or plan gets submitted for that property, there will be hearings before the planning commission. They will review it. They will make recommendations to the supervisors. We will have our engineer take a look at it. Chester County Planning Commission. Since this is a conditional use, the supervisors, in approving the plan, if they were going to approve it, could put conditions on it. One condition could be that the path does not go out to that cul-de-sac. I don't know. I haven't seen a plan. I haven't been involved in the discussion. This is something that would take place over a period of months, and each one of these and the planning commission meetings and the supervisors meetings are all public, and anybody who is interested, anyone who has concerns, is welcome to attend and make comments and tell them what your concerns are.
And I appreciate that, thank you. I guess my question is more around, or kind of further comment, is the right-of-way. Okay, the fact that you have the ability to do this, I guess I'm just a bit unclear, and forgive me, it's just not my area of forte, around what is considered like an eminent domain where you can take and do what you want with it, or that all of a sudden this property that is somebody's front yard gets ripped up and turned into a road. Like, I get what I don't, I guess I'm just unclear on the property right-of-way that you folks have. Who determines getting to use it?
The township, when the township accepted the roads in Goshen Downs, they took a 50-foot wide strip through that cul-de-sac. I believe, given the age of Goshen Downs, the intention would have been at that time to extend that development. That provision of, from a planning point of view, cul-de-sacs are big. because you want circulation, you want more than one way in, more than one way out. So typically, when developments were built, they ran the property, the road right away, all the way up to the property. What that means is that the Lewises, they have the same right to access the cul-de-sac as you do, because they have frontage on a public street. Whether or not the developer wants to extend that street, that'll be something that will be subject when they come in with a plan.
Okay.
But for
And I
our
understand it's
purposes,
premature, I'm just trying, like, I don't understand the.
the township owns the ground, and it owns the ground all the way up to the property line. We took the ground as a public street. This means the Lewises have the ability to access that public street.
Okay, that makes it more clear.
It should be noted that the changes that are being considered don't impact that. Right now, a developer could come in under the current zoning and suggest that pass through, so this doesn't change that. That's just.
That's fine. No, and I appreciate it. It's just I'm trying to understand all of feasible, future.
One of the things that I did today was I pulled the Goshen Down subdivision plan. It's a recorded document. I'm happy to.
I have it.
Okay. Well, if you look at that, you'll see the cul-de-sac goes beyond, and as Rick mentioned, the land area that's been dedicated to the township is a public right-of-way now. So, any the Lewis family or anybody that develops that property has the right to access to that public land.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, it's just helpful to understand the legalities of that. I guess the Lewis family is working on a walking trail proposal and such, again with the dump off. So is that kind of the same sort of right of way that they have to access that with their little map?
When they come up with a preliminary plan which they submit to the township, then we will know all those details.
Okay. Perfect. I think that's it. And then I guess from a financial standpoint, since everything seems to boil down to money at this point with what they're doing, it appears they'd had the property for sale. It was unable to be sold to a developer, clearly because it's undevelopable for any sort of money. I guess from the financial standpoint, has it been, I guess, looked at from an East Goshen standpoint to see what the financial implications are for East Goshen as far as money that's going to come in based on the dwellings and what's being proposed? There's obviously benefit for you folks from an East Goshen standpoint.
I'm happy to answer that. That's a great question. You know, obviously, anytime you have new development, there's both one-time and ongoing, you know, either fees or taxes, one way or another, that come in. On the flip side, there's also additional services that have to be provided, whether that's in the form of additional cops, or that's in the form of additional chemicals at the wastewater treatment plant, et cetera, et cetera. And it also depends a lot how much revenue from the township comes down to really how expensive the properties are. So, but if you just sort of take a kind of a back of the envelope, your kind of $500,000 home, you know, in lack of a better sort of estimate to work for, I sort of sketched it out that it's about $9,000 in one-time revenue. That includes permitting, that includes the sewer tap-in fee, and there's about, and per property, assuming the property owner makes about the family makes about $100,000 a year, it works out to about $1,000 in tax revenue. So you multiply that by 30, and so certainly in one-time costs, that's a lot. In one-time fees that first year, that's a lot. On an ongoing basis, you know, that would be $30,000, but that would be offset, as I said, by additional, you know, police patrol, additional sewer chemicals, and all the various other, and certainly plowing if they're public roads, and all the various other services the township provides.
Thank you. And just a final question. They have the right to develop it today. So I guess it kind of boils down to, like, why are we here then?
Well, they have a right to develop it today. The question is whether it is going to be single-family homes or some carriage homes or triplexes. And that's really the only thing that we're here for.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Don Thompson. This is really strange to be on this side of the table. I spent almost 30 years on that side of the table in Willistown as a supervisor, chairman of the zoning hearing board, and planning commission member. On top of that, as many of you know, I was a developer. So I have a couple of comments for you, and that is that my address is 1608 Ulster Lane, East Goshen. cluster ordinances by nature provide a bonus, a density bonus. It happens no matter what you do. We justify these clusters around open space. And what I think you've heard tonight is that although open space is a wonderful thing to maintain and preserve, it shouldn't be at the increase in number of dwellings, addresses, families, whatever you want to call it. If you can maintain the open space without increasing the population, great. But you got to be real careful when you change your ordinance, and it may be to join two houses together or three, but you're in fact creating a density bonus for someone. And that's where you got to be careful. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Chris Rowe, and I live at 10 Anthony Drive in East White. And like Kathy, who was up here before, we're neighbors, and our property abuts the Lewis property on that side. And we have a number of concerns. I guess the primary one is consistent with what the last speaker was talking about. This property has a certain value as it is, and that value was not sufficient, I guess, for a developer to buy it now. Why is that? Because open space is built into this property. There's so much that's undevelopable about our neighboring property with the streams. There's at least 2 streams that come together through it, the steep slopes, etc. It inherently has open space that can't be and shouldn't be destroyed. So it doesn't seem necessary that the township, now I'm speaking as a neighbor of your township, but that the township would change its law for this property. And that's primarily what we've been talking about, is this one property and changing the ability for that property to be developed. Now I know in theory there are 4 properties, but that seems very theoretical based on what we heard on the other night, that those would face the same issue. This property seems to be the focus, and I would say as a budding neighbor of it, that it has open space naturally because nature put it that way. It would be developed probably. We saw one of these, and the one up now is by right. And I happen to be a lawyer, but I'm not a real estate lawyer. And perhaps Ms. Camp can explain what by right is compared to what else we've been talking about today.
Right, so that's what I said before. Sorry, there are 3 different ways in a zoning ordinance that uses are approved. A by right use means that the zoning officer can issue a zoning permit. There's no further approval that's needed. So for example, in a commercial zoning district, retail stores are typically by right uses. They've made a legislative determination that that use is appropriate in that district. There's no further review needed from any board of supervisor or zoning hearing board. Mark Gordon, as a zoning officer, can issue a permit, provided it meets the other requirements of the zoning ordinance. The cluster that's currently today allowed on R2 property, such as the Lewis tract, requires conditional use approval. So the applicant has to file an application, pay the application fee, come to a public hearing before the board of supervisors. There's specific criteria related to that particular development, and there's more general criteria that apply to all conditional uses. Property owners within a close proximity have the right to become parties to that hearing. They have a right to appeal a decision that the board makes when it's a conditional use approval. That serves as the zoning approval for that use. The third type, as Mr. Thompson mentioned, he served on the zoning hearing board in Willetstown. A zoning hearing board can grant a use approval through something called a special exception. So it's not as common anymore, but oftentimes religious uses or something that potentially could have an impact upon neighbors was approved through a special exception process. So the proposed amendment that was developed, to answer another question, the only thing that's different from the current cluster regulations that are allowed on this property or any property in the R2 with a certain minimum acreage is that it would allow a different type of dwelling unit. So today's ordinances only speak to single-family detached dwellings being permitted by a cluster. The proposed ordinance would allow twins or semi-attached dwellings and also townhomes, but with only 3 as maximum. So that's, hopefully that answered your question.
This model that shows about 20 homes is by right. It doesn't
By
require...
right, would not require any approval from this board.
Okay.
As far as, but for zoning, they would still require subdivision land
Yeah, no,
development
it's
approval.
understood. But a lot of those parcels, it doesn't look like they could be developed. I mean, it looks like they're primarily steep slope, and even on this drawing, which I know is not
I asked the same question when I first saw it, and I was told that there is sufficient, even though most of a lot might be unbuildable, there is sufficient land on each of those lots for a house to be built. I asked the same question.
Okay, all right, because some of them is a lot of red. There's a lot of red, yeah. And if, you know, and the bottom line is if all that was doable now, the property would be sold and would be developed. Likely, maybe not this, maybe they would go through a conditional use under the current cluster ordinance, but it's hard to see what, if this property is driving this, why it's driving this. And I'm saying this as a neighbor. The concerns that flow from it are, they will be, you know, happen to be in our backyard, but there'll be cluster development right behind us. It'll surround this beautiful building, which is a historic building. It's an impressive building inside and outside, and it'll be you know a horseshoe around it of multifamily dwellings. And right now, that's not the case. It's a beautiful property that, you know, we all wish that somebody would have come along and used it for some other purpose that maintained that. But that's what a developer must have in mind. Otherwise, why does the equitable, you know, interest asking, you know, East Goshen to change its zoning law? It must be it's just not as economically viable to go that route of requiring them to go through the current ordinance. I mean, that's likely the reality of this. The road, Hershey Mill Road, I don't know what a traffic study would say about 36 you know, homes being added in there and exiting on Hershey Mill Road. Folks who have concerns about Gordon Drive or Jackson Drive, I'm not familiar with that neighborhood, but there'll have to be an analysis of where people come out of this, and it's going to either be on these multifamily home configurations. There are either 2 exits, an ingress and egress on Hershey Mill, which is a farm road, as has been mentioned, and has problems, safety problems at the bottom where it intersects with Green Hill. It also has up on East Whiteland side where you cannot walk that road or run on that road without risking your life on the as you approach the Villa Maria and Immaculata property, because you can't see cars coming over that hill. There already are cars that come too fast down that road. There'll be at least 36 times 2 that this will allow.
If this is approved by a conditional use with one of the clusters, the supervisors can request a traffic study at that point in time to make those decisions. We have looked at, spent a little time, we had our engineers spend a little time looking at traffic, and during peak hours, you can assume 1 extra trip per house. So it's not a huge amount of extra traffic, but certainly once a plan is submitted, we can go and get a more definitive traffic study done.
Yeah, and I guess the fear of the audience would be that might be, the train is out of the station to some degree, and it's going to be hard to say no to a proposal that otherwise...
Well, so I'll tell you, because Rick asked me to be prepared to address that, is that, I mean, traffic alone can't be a basis to deny the development right. So if today's ordinance, but even under today's ordinance, that's the law. So today's ordinance with the cluster development, if they came in for seeking conditional use, if what the standard is that if the traffic that would be resultant from that proposed development is so much worse than what you would typically expect from 36 cluster homes, you know, and that would have to be evaluated through a traffic study, then the board could impose conditions to require traffic improvements, or they ultimately could deny. But it's very difficult to deny unless, again, the way that particular development was going to be built was going to have such an adverse impact upon traffic that it created harm to public health, safety, welfare.
And that, I'm glad you clarified that, because really the train will be out of the station.
Well, but understand that, let me say this, and it's because I've sat for 23 years now listening to traffic experts talk. The impact from, and I'm not doing this to be critical, I'm just saying the reality is the impact from 21 homes, which potentially could be by right, and again, these are concept plans. I think I'm hoping to make that very clear. Nobody's done on this board an evaluation of exactly how many would work, complying with all the different regulations. Beyond the township regulations, there are state regulations that we didn't talk about. If more than 1 acre of the land gets disturbed, they have to get a permit called the NPDES permit. It's a state permit that requires them to control stormwater erosion and sedimentation control. And those are very stringent standards. So nobody really knows the exact number. What the ordinance would do is establish a maximum number.
Right.
But I don't remember the train of thought I was going down. The difference between 21 single-family dwellings, the traffic impact between 21 and 36, which would be the max that would be allowed under any ordinance, is insignificant.
Yeah.
And that delta is not going to be sufficient enough to deny a use.
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty certain of that.
So it just seems likely that if the current ordinance worked, then they'd be fine. They wouldn't be going through this whole process. The developer wouldn't have paid money, you know, a couple of years ago to hold this until the zoning changed. So in other words, our assumption is less homes would actually ever be built on this property unless you do what you're proposing to do, because it's just not practical. The economics of it aren't that great. If you allow that U-shaped multifamily homes to go in, I guarantee you we will get that development. I mean, it just seems like that's an ideal model for a developer to use. And so, you know, the concern is this is enabling that to happen regarding this particular property. And in terms of that house, what will the restrictions be on the use of that? I think it's a 12-bedroom house, right, or something like that. It's a huge house. What restrictions will there be if this is part of a multifamily development? What kind of restrictions will there be on the use of that house?
Well, it certainly can't be made into 12 apartments.
There are apartments there already that are part of the barn, right?
East Goshen Township has an historic resources ordinance. That house is on the inventory. It's one of the historic resources. So for the plans that Panoni did, we just assumed it was going to remain a one single-family house. There is a provision in our ordinance where you have an historic structure, you can use the word chop it up into units. Each unit has to have at least 800 square feet. So I don't know how big the house is, but theoretically somebody could come in and assuming, engineering wise, they could chop it up and put up to 800, the minimum unit size is 800 square feet. But put that many units in that house today under the current ordinance without doing it.
Okay. And the barn,
the barn, we don't treat the barn as historic resources accessory, so the barn could come down. Our ordinance is primarily focused on the dwelling unit. And it's a carrot and stick approach. We try to encourage people to keep historic structures and use them for adaptive reuses. And one of the ways we do that is we give some extra usage for on some properties. But in this case, the one that would probably be most appropriate would be residential conversion. We take the bigger house and again chop it up into some number of small units. But again, there's a whole process, hearing process that has to be gone through to do that.
And would that end up meaning additional families in this?
You're right, but they could do that today, or they could do that under either of the first options. Right. So again, it's all.
For some reason, they're looking for a better, more economically viable plan. We don't know what that is. I don't know whether it has to do with dividing up that big house or not. But
Well, I think if you look at the plan that Trilogy sent us, and what,
I've not seen it.
okay, well, it's on our website. And what they attempting to do is they put a street in, and everything was to the west, no, north of the house and barn. And what they were trying to convey is, okay, we're going to try and preserve that valley and preserve the view shed from those for the existing house and for the new houses. They weren't interested in going across the creek up towards Jackson Circle. That's where they were coming from.
Yeah, and so that's on my side.
Yeah,
That's the other side
no
of-
disrespect, right. They're putting development on the north side of the property because the stream valley runs to the south, and they were trying to preserve that. Now, and again, they had 36 units. If you look at one of the other options, the single-family open space option, they got 36 units, but they could also have gone across the creek and put and develop on the south side of the creek.
If that were possible.
Yes, yeah. Well, again, all of this, anytime you cross creeks, you need to get, DEP approval, maybe Army Corps of Engineers approval. But again, the plans that we have up here are conceptual plans done at a high level, just so somebody get an idea of what it would look like.
And so there's only one entrance now, there's only one roadway now.
Our ordinance requires that if you have more than 25 dwelling units, and today, well, Goshen Downs probably would not be approved today the way it's configured, because it has more than 25 units. But if you have 25 or more dwelling units, you have to have two ways in it.
Yeah. And that would mean a stream crossing.
They will need a stream crossing.
Or Gordon Drive, or the other.
They will need a stream crossing to come in off of Hershey Mill Road regardless, at least one.
Well, they have one now. I mean, there is a.
Yeah, but that's only a driveway. They have to have a real road sometime crossing.
But they're going to put two roads.
Well, under that scenario, they're showing two roads, yes.
Okay.
And under that scenario, they also have two other stream crossings with the other stream crossing the other stream. So there's 4 stream crossings on that one, which again impacts the open space.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, I guess, I will say thank you for hearing neighbors, and, so there's another parcel right behind, there's a parcel of this in East White, it's about 2.5 acres, and there's a farmhouse on that.
We, East Goshen, from our purposes, I believe the zoning in East White in there is 1 acre. But for our purposes, we did not assume any development on that property. But realistically, if there's over 2 acres there, the expectation they would somehow try and get two houses.
Yes.
I mean,
And I guess you don't know whether that farmhouse is protected.
if it's in East Whiteland, I don't know what East Whiteland, I don't know what they have.
Okay, so we don't know whether that. Well, thank you for hearing neighbors from East Whiteland, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Joe Padillo, 981 Ocean Hill Road. My driveway would be at the end of the street, and actually my house would be directly in the headlights of every car that came up that roadway. Just to give you a brief history about how I came to the township 10 years ago, I accidentally turned down the street looking for houses and fell in love with it immediately. I look out my back window and I see that big open field that belongs to the IHM Duns, and I look across the front yard and I see Miss Lewis's property, and thought I was the luckiest guy in the world to have that both in the front and the back of my house. That was in February of 2009. And come spring, I was out cleaning up my front yard and I see this little speck coming up the driveway in a golf cart. And then she kept coming up the driveway and across Hershey Mill Road, and then up my front yard, through my lawn, and up to my front door where I was standing, and there was this little old lady, Betty Lewis, who, if anybody's ever met her, she was just an amazing woman. And she sat there for an hour telling me the history of her property and how it went out to Weston and the train station was there, and what her husband was an importer and exporter, and the things that they did over the decades that they lived on the property. They gave up some of the property to more steams, people developed that, and I probably don't remember it accurately, but even then I knew, looking out the front window of my house, I knew it couldn't stay that way forever. I knew it was possible. I knew that Betty Lewis was going to stay there forever. Right now, I'm looking at Mr. Ward. I'm hoping he's going to adopt me and live here with him. I thank you for the work that you've done over there. And I think that's truly commendable for the amount of effort that he's put into keeping that the way it is. And I've met Betty Lewis's daughter, and she's a nice person. She really is. And she's doing what's best for her family. And I get that. And I'm just looking out for what's best for my family. And I don't think she's trying to do anything wrong. I believe that the ordinances are there in place, and she's trying to do what she can. About 6 months ago, when you guys sent the letters out, maybe I'm off a couple months or so, the neighbors up in Mill Stream started lighting their torches and wanted to come down in March. And I secretly chuckled, thinking that there's no way they could develop that property with more than 8 or 10 houses, because frankly, some of the best pictures I had hanging in my house are from my kids walking back there in the streams and playing in the streams, and know the open space that's back there, and walking back to the dam that comes off the pond from Mill Stream. And I know what's back there. It's a gold mine of nothing. It's a gold mine of absolutely nothing. And I'd walk out there and I think about how great it was walking my small kids back there, and think, well, it would be totally different if there was a whole bunch of houses out there, but I can't control that. I can only control the little things, and I hope that you take from my little story that maybe there isn't that much developable land. I sat back there and I say, practicing that word, and that word doesn't matter. There's not enough in the land that they could build houses on. Frankly, I just don't see it back there. I think it's too wet. I think it's too pristine, and I think there's too many steep slopes. And I still truly believe that they won't be able to get as many houses as 25 or 24 or whatever the case may be. But I do believe that there's a balance here, and I think the township has the power to keep that balance, to keep people happy, to keep people in Goshen Downs happy, to keep me happy. I mean, if I could look out my front yard and still see trees out front, that'd be great. The people on Andrew Drive, they have a great little community up there, and had I realized, I'm sorry, not Andrew, Anthony, had I realized that was up there, maybe I'd moved up there. I think it's a beautiful little community. And the people that live up on 10 and 12, they look out back of their house and they see the same thing that I see out in front of my house. I think you guys have the power to keep that the way it is. And I'm not saying that cluster houses are bad. I really don't. I don't know that they're terrible. And I agree with Mr. Manuel. I think that they probably would be very expensive, cluster houses. And I don't think it would downgrade our community up there. I don't think it would be a traffic issue. My kids aren't going to play in the middle of Hershey Mill Road. Frankly, I'm a police officer, and I would tell every parent out there to keep their kids out of the street. They don't belong there. But my kids won't play there. If anything, having more people might benefit my kids, might have more people to play with. I don't know. But I don't think, if you keep it the way it is, the way the ordinance is, I think there's a good balance there for everybody. I frankly think Miss Lewis would turn over in her grave if she saw any houses built on her property, but that's not for me. That's not for me to decide. But I really wish you would consider not changing the ordinance. And I thank you all for having this forum, because it really is, you guys have been, it's just a contentious issue, and I think you guys are handling it really well.
Is there anyone else? Okay, I don't see,
Robert Capucci, 1214 Sandy Cup Lane, Hershey Mill Estate area. One of the observations I'm making is, and I'm doing the numbers in my head, is that under I'm for the existing ordinance. I'm not against the change. I'm against the changes. But the observation I'm making is that for a builder developer, it costs so much to build a home. So under the existing ordinance, you're talking about 20 plus homes on the property. So that's 20 times X amount of money. However, you change the ordinance, now a duplex, okay, even though it could be 36 units, it's really 18 homes. So the cost of home is about the same to build a duplex or a triplex it is for a single home. So the developer is saving money and by doing that. 18 homes for a duplex, 12 homes for a triplex. So keep that in mind, that this is to the developer's benefit, not ours. Thank you.
am Deborah Walker. I live on 1336 Jackson Lane. I know you guys don't want to hear repetition, but I kind of think repetition...
Excuse me, what was the street? I didn't hear it.
Jackson Lane.
Jackson?
Yep. I know you guys don't want to hear repetition, but I think maybe it would help you guys know the different weights in the community of how people are feeling. So I was here tonight with all my neighbors. I would like to say that, you know, the Lewises, obviously, they do have a right to develop their property. We knew that when we moved in there, you know, with all that woods abutting our backyard. I think that one of the things we're really asking now in Goshen Downs is that just the development of a new property shouldn't rip up our neighborhood that's been the way it is for 40 years. And I know you guys don't really like cul-de-sacs from a development perspective, but all of us bought into the cul-de-sac. And all of our kids play in the cul-de-sac. We love the cul-de-sac.
Me too.
Yeah, so please, please don't come for our cul-de-sac. Just to satisfy some other people's money, you know, their deep pockets and that they want to fill. Who probably don't even live in East Goshen Township. I would ask you to look at all the surrounding properties and just try to do no harm as you're making these decisions. And thank you for having fun. Thank you for listening. I know it's probably not easy.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to speak? Okay. I think we're winding down.
My name is Pat Burns. I've lived on Moorstein Road, 1350, for 35 years. And I got the initial letter, but I didn't get to come to the October meeting, and so I didn't realize that this was all about a specific incident. I thought it was...
It's not.
I thought it was going to be, it's the township-wide decision.
It is in, this change, if it were approved, would be in R2.
Yes.
And R2 is not just this one property.
So my question is, and I heard briefly there were 4 theoretical properties. Is one of them the Shipper Farm on Moorstein Road?
They have over 20 acres, yes.
Yes. So this would, if passed, would personally affect my life. And I know I hear traffic is not a big deal. I mean, not a consideration, not a big deal. Not a consideration in passing.
Not a legal basis to deny development.
Right, that's what I meant. But Moorstein Road is a very windy, bucolic road, and it's 2-lane. It goes down much narrower when it goes over those 2 bridges. And I just can't imagine adding that many more families to our street. Moorstein's going to need a traffic light soon to even get out on the Boot Road, and it's just going to make it even more congested. And I don't know, I kind of like Moorstein Road the way it is, so I just wanted to say that.
Sam McNulty, 1783 Jefferson Downs, which is East Goshen. Just an observation. Right now, where we sit before this changes, we have open space. Yeah, you can say that, okay, with this, we can get development. But for what purpose? I mean, we have the open space now. Seems like most of it's open because it's not conducive for developers to develop it. So therefore, I'm a gambler. Leave it as it is, okay? And I'll go along with that. I don't think you should, for the purpose of, it seems like one developer, to cascade down the path, because my fear is you're going to do it for 20 plus, and once that's in, well, let's go to 15 to 19. By the way, your legend on your map should be, you can't have 15 to 20, and 20 plus. 15 to 19, then 20, and you drive a guy like me nuts when you do it the way you did it. But I also have a question. When is a stormwater retention basin required? Is it by the number of units? So Anybody know?
Under the state law today, when you put impervious coverage on your property, you have to manage that stormwater. So when you put a shed on if you put a shed on your property today, you have to do something with the stormwater. And the basin is just one method that they utilize.
Okay, so,
If it's more than 10 square feet, then you have to do something with stormwater.
okay, so it doesn't matter how many units that we're
No,
talking
it's a function of how much impervious coverage you're putting down. Blacktop, driveways, roads, buildings, those things are constitute impervious coverage.
Okay, those 3 things I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Liz Driscoll. I live at 1238 Upton Circle. I appreciate the opportunity that you've given everyone to speak. I was not at the October 25th meeting, so I don't know, and I wondered if someone could answer, what was this driven by to have this ordinance changed to begin with?
As you said, somebody has an equitable interest in the Lewis property, and they
A
took a look.
developer. Is that what you mean? Okay.
Of somebody who builds homes, and they took a look at the current ordinances and had expressed an interest to be able to build something other than a single-family detached dwelling, and had asked the Planning Commission and Board to consider an amendment that would allow a cluster-type development for a type of unit other than a single-family detached dwelling.
Okay.
I think it's also fair to note that our comprehensive plan that was written 5 years ago suggested that we look at this from a planning commission perspective, and the planning commission put a lot of work into this, and the idea was the diversity of home offerings in East Goshen Township to be able to for instance, in a triplex, maybe my 34-year-old single professional daughter could come into the township and not buy a 4-bedroom, 2-story house on an acre. So to bring a more diverse population into the township. So it's part of the comprehensive plan written by the township. So this consideration, I think everyone thinks, you know, the Lewis's property looks like it's the first of the 3 over 20-acre properties that might look at development. And we're using it as the example for this exercise, this little workshop that we're doing. But it's consistent with our township comprehensive plan that was written 5 years ago.
Okay, thank you. Also, where do you go from here after these meetings today? Is that what you wanted to
that
say?
was, as soon as everybody was done speaking, that's where I was
Okay.
gonna go.
Well, then I'll just go and sit down, but I'd like to say that my neighbor is Tom Ward. He's my back neighbor, and I again appreciate all that he has done for East Goshen and where we live in Goshen Downs, and I would hope that it would remain the same.
Thank you. First, I want to thank everybody who's come and who's been able to share with us your thoughts and your concerns. This is what we need in order to make decisions. Our next meeting of Board of Supervisors is February 5th. At that meeting, we will make a decision as to what happens. There are several possibilities of what can happen. One, we could decide not to go ahead with this at all. That's one. 2, we could say, hey, we've heard a lot of good things, but we need to tweak it. You know, there are ways we could make it work if we make some changes. In that case, it would go back to the Planning Commission for them to review and to work on. That's you know, anything else, Rick?
Decide to defer decision at that point?
No, we're not, we will make a decision on at that meeting. That's our, you know, we have determined that will happen. So I want to thank you all for coming. We will take everything you said into consideration, and hopefully we will come up with a reasonable decision for the whole township. Thank you.